The beach. No, after lunch they're sleeping probably. Well, distinguished guests, dear panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the third panel, entitled Between Money, Knowledge and Partnership, Define Priorities, Exchange and Cooperate. As we have answered the questions why and who in the previous panels, we now try to seek answers to the question how, meaning what is the most effective toolkit for the implementation of sustainable development. We have money, we have knowledge and partnership. We will see how those feed into development goals focused on security, institution building, economic development, and human rights. And we will see how those tools are handled by the countries according to their priorities and to what effect. When trying to prioritize money, knowledge, and own experience, there are pros and cons to each of the three. Money alone, we know, does not suffice. Without the lasting feedback of the recipient, we cannot have a lasting, effective, sustainable development. Knowledge is important, but cannot exist on its own outside the context. Each recipient has its own particular needs and requires adequate know-how to learn and apply it. Experience of being aid recipient in the process of becoming a new donor is very valuable in terms of a transfer of authentic, tailor-made insights to the partner. However, it cannot stand on its own. Even the greatest of experiences need money backup. The ideal approach would be to combine all of the three on a case-by-case basis, and that will be the tailor-made approach that reaps most of the benefits. Next question, how sustainable are the future sustainable development goals? Do they really cover and encompass the development as a whole? And here, one of the most overlooked elements is certainly the external conflict. We all know that conflicts impede and reverse the development. No country is immune to conflict, and here it's crucial to identify the root causes and find the appropriate cure. Another challenge would be to find the mechanisms that would address the conflict and peacefully overcome it and possibly prevent it. It is important that during the development intervention, we always bear in mind that we are in the relationships of equals, partner to partner. And despite the fact each donor has its own priorities, we should be looking at the preferences of the recipient in order to strike the right balance. That is our key word here, the balanced approach. It is not about the donor, it's about the partner, the real needs of the partner. And experience of being aid recipient or country in transition is certainly an added value in that process. And allow me here to introduce my own personal experience as a Croatian diplomat in Afghanistan. My experience is coming from a war-torn country, serving in a NATO mission in Mazar-e-Sharif, has proven to be a value added for Afghanistan. It gave me the ability of having a wider perspective of the conflict landscape of different stakeholders, which under regular circumstances wouldn't be considered. It gave me really a key component, which is an empathic view. It showed me how important it is for a country going to the conflict to safeguard its people's and its country's dignity. I dare say I had a more holistic approach of the particular local context than the rest of the colleagues there. I was accepted by Afghan as a peer, a trustworthy and a genuine partner precisely because of having this experience and having faced similar challenges. I became their friend, having a direct access to their families, homes, and children. I remember this very intimate episode when we were visiting Tahar, in an official visit of a northern province of Tahar in Afghanistan. The local governor, after we were served the official dinner, he actually invited me to step in and go over upstairs to the family rooms to meet his family, his wife and his children, and to introduce me to a very intimate part of his life. So I dare say this is another aspect of this approach would be value added of me being a woman. As a female Croatian diplomat and NATO senior civilian representative advisor, actually gave the Afghan women, in their own words, motivation to pursue their education, to fight for their rights, and to have their voice heard among their men as equals. So the lessons learned from Croatian own experience would be, yes, do address the root causes and strike the right balance while having a peer-to-peer approach. But nevertheless, let us hear from our panelists here. We have a good mixture of small, new donors, of recipients, and of big leading donors. So we have 8 different countries, 8 viewpoints. And on that note, I open the floor on what promises to be an interesting discussion. So we are opening the discussion with our first panelist, His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Mr. Børge Brende. Welcome. Your resume includes diverse areas of interest and policies, including private and non-governmental sector, dealing with economic affairs, energy, trade, and environmental issues. Speaking of which, I received confidential information from a reliable source that you have been named by one of the most beautiful national parks in Norway. So with that name, then it's no wonder that you became naturally a Minister of Environment, and afterwards the Secretary General of Norwegian Red Cross as well. And you really have an encompassing perspective on multilateral affairs. And these are also your country's forte. So Norway is one of the leading donors and co-facilitator of the UN consultations for financing for development Addis Ababa conference. What are the lessons learned Norway has taken away from that process towards a post-2015 agenda? Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us to discuss a very crucial topic. The topic of ODA is, of course, important. Increasingly so in a world where we're seeing that foreign policy is becoming domestic policy. The security threats that we are facing in the margins of Europe and also in Maghreb are as much challenges for us, and that we see on a daily basis. Running up to Addis, Addis is Monterey 2, the follow-up on financing for development. And this is a conference on how to make sure that we are able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, the overarching goal of the new SDGs is eradicate all extreme poverty by 2030. In 2000, we had the overall goal to halve the amount of people living in extreme poverty by 2015. We met that goal already probably 2012, 2013. So now is the question, how can we have a game plan for 2013 being successful? I think that has to be based on a policy where ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, is a part of it, but it is also as much about resource mobilization in the developing countries. We know that there is a huge potential for also mobilizing more resources domestically. The ODA has to be more catalytic in the sense that the ODA needs to stimulate those processes that leads to increased national resource mobilization. And in addition, we know that investments, private investments, are more important than ever, and we have to support those kind of policies that also strengthen investments from abroad. The big change that has been taking place, a staggering change, is that since the 90s, the importance of ODA in the developing world has decreased quite dramatically. In 1990, ODA was 62 of the financial inflow to developing countries. Today, this is 13%, while FDI, foreign direct investments, are more than 50%. In that sense, we will still continue to have ambitious targets when it comes to ODA, but we have to make sure that the ODA is catalytic in stimulating those processes that leads to foreign direct investments and national resource mobilization. I think this is what Addis has to be about. It is really about what kind of policies lead to a country moving from being poor to becoming a middle-income country. And we know that policies also domestically means a lot. Look, and this is my example, look at Kenya and South Korea, since we have the South Korean deputy minister here. In 1960, the GDP per capita in Korea and in Kenya was the same. Today, the GDP per capita in Korea, South Korea, to make sure that that is, it has to be a bit precise on that one. In South Korea, the GDP per capita is 29 times the GDP per capita in Kenya. That shows us that ODA needs to strengthen those processes that have led to that kind of development we have seen in, for example, Singapore, that we have seen in China, that we have seen in South Korea, growth, investments, jobs, and all those things that belong to a positive circle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Thank you for giving us a nice, short, brief overview of the Addis Ababa.
At least an overview.
No, that's very good. That's very good. It's really, the numbers that you gave us are really impressive, and you really painted a good picture that could take us quite ready to this upcoming conference. And thank you for the perspective of the co-facilitator and the leading donor. Moving on to one of the new donors, I'm giving the floor to His Excellency Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia. Laipni lūdzam. Mr. Minister, you have experience in security and defense policies as former Secretary of State in the Ministry of Defense. As one of the leading members of Latvian delegation for accession negotiations with NATO, you're also well aware of the NATO structures. Latvia has just recently handed over its first-time EU presidency. Give us your perspective on the process of national development cooperation as a new donor compared to priorities you have outlined during your EU presidency. What is the value added of EU in development cooperation? That will be one part of the question. And then Secretary General of NATO has said yesterday that there is no security without development, and there is an interconnection between the two. And I would like to know how do you reflect this interconnectivity in your country's transitional process from that perspective? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Pretty complicated questions. So I'll try to answer anyhow my way. But first of all, I have to say that so it happens that we started our presidency in January this year with the opening also of the European Year for Development. And actually we had a huge conference on January 9th in Riga, where we had all stakeholders, governments, NGOs, professionals, also people from think tanks, where we were discussing what post-2015 development agenda should look like, how EU should be best prepared for the conference in Addis Ababa, which actually starts next Monday, very soon. And here I do want to congratulate, of course, Western and Croatian government for taking really perfect timing of having this discussion today and tomorrow on those issues, and probably even better preparing for this conference. So we had already that discussion, and actually during our presidency we had to work on a joint EU position when it comes to development assistance financing, official development assistance financing. Mind you that this has not been an easy process. The discussion we had on 26th of May was very long, very difficult, because this is not only about how you get common position, but it is also about finances. It's also about the way how you can best use the development assistance tools. So, however, I think that with all those challenges we are currently facing, terrorism, migration, also climate change, the whole discussion was on time. Actually, we have seen the direct, let's say, ties between what we try to do to address root causes of terrorism, poverty, conflicts, also root causes of migration. We are currently being challenged, as well as climate change. When you talk with countries from the African continent, from Pacific region, they are ready to subscribe to some of ambitious goals, but then they also say that they need some more additional resources to achieve those. So we have seen quite an interlinkage between all those security and long-term development and sustainable development goals. If we look from our own perspective, that has been remarkable, because back in 1990s we were actually on the receiving end. Right now, although I still do not find that financial means we are contributing on bilateral level or national level are sufficient, and we are trying to increase those, but we are already the contributing nation. And we have set a couple of priorities when it comes to our development agenda, and I'm very happy to see that actually most of them have been incorporated also in the EU agenda. One, and very important, is the rule of law, public administration. If we don't spend, let's say, a lot to create viable structures in those countries that are on the receiving end, then the whole attempt for economic development, reform, stable governing structures will be in vain. Second, what we have seen, and we have been working tirelessly actually through bilateral programs, is gender equality. We have good programs already with Central Asian nations. We have been working very closely with our national and also international NGOs on this subject, providing really great partnership. We see that also gender equality issue is one of those that EU is going to attach quite an importance. We have been talking also about the development of small and medium enterprises. So those issues are actually incorporated. Then the big question is how you make it, the whole development assistance programs more efficient. How you avoid probably what has been the subject of criticism, that sometimes we are too little and too late, and probably there is not, let's say, those who should receive the development assistance, but there are some more bureaucratic problems. There are sometimes also issues with corruption in some of receiving countries. So those are issues that I believe European Union will be addressing very strongly during the conference that is going to take place immediately after this forum in Addis Ababa, but also in September in the United Nations summit. We are probably, some of us are definitely going to attend. So this is the kind of first part. The second, our own experience of the integration into European Union and NATO back in 1990s and beginning of the millennium has shown that while we are now, after what we have seen in Ukraine, the illegal annexation Crimea, feels that we have been doing the right decisions in the right time, but I think one lesson learned from those for those countries that are also currently are in the process of integration, particularly into NATO, is that NATO and security is not only about military equipment, military stuff. It is also about such things as rule of law, anti-corruption system. Because if you have corrupted security services, or if you have corruption in military procurement systems, then actually you are a very weak state. And probably at some point in time, some of very difficult decisions we had to make then paid off. And those were not only about defense spending, defense reform, those were also about working on the rule of law issues, strengthening the anti-corruption offices, police capacity, court systems, and so on. Of course, let me end by what I said at the beginning. Our presidency, and we all actually, are in a situation to what sometimes I can describe as a perfect storm. We have developing situation in the eastern neighborhood of Europe. We have very turbulent situation in the south. We have two distinct challenges: terrorism, ISIS, fight against ISIS, and migration. We are trying to address sometimes consequences. What we need to address right now is, of course, also root cause. And here, development assistance tools, if they are applied rightly, would be of importance and also of efficiency. And also, let's not see this as the government responsibility. It is also the private sector, NGOs, and even private citizens. We have a great example where Latvian mecenate is actually working quite well in Guinea-Bissau, putting his own money. I was longer as Norway. As the new donor, I had much more to say, but I'm happily ending here and passing to my friend Nikola.
Thank you very much. You've given us a very good insight into your country's own transitional process. I think it's very important. I think the lessons learned that you outlined, especially in the area of strengthening the rule of law, reforms, gender equality, anti-corruption measures, they can also be applied today to different countries that are going through the same process today. That leads us to our next speaker. This is the first deputy minister and foreign minister of foreign minister of Republic of Macedonia, Minister Poposki. Dobro dojdovte. Your background in economy and trade issues within the EU institutional framework certainly makes you a valuable interlocutor on this topic. Your country has been a long-time candidate for the EU membership. How is this influencing your national priorities in development? Please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for promoting me. I'm still a foreign minister. The story would have been much easier if we were looking from the perspective of a receiving country, because we have experienced that back in the 90s when actually foreign assistance was pretty critical to Macedonia's progress. And it was pretty difficult for us to imagine that we will be once in a position to think about a new legislation that we've adopted recently about how we can be part of a bigger story, the European one, that we aspire to, and comprises an obligation, a duty, an honor, I would say, to be part of the biggest contributing power in the world. I'm not an expert in the area, so I've done the thing that the politicians do the best. I've asked someone who really knows the things, and I said money, knowledge, partnership, and I got a very simple answer. Money can buy you knowledge and eventually can create you partnerships. A very shortcut answer that I got from my neighbor, not a consultant, but an intelligent one, because essentially it goes down to money to some extent. Because you will never be able to be part of this bigger story of assisting someone and helping someone out to go from a point where you're receiving to a point where you can share the benefits with others. But this is not enough, and there are too many risks. The question that we have asked ourselves at this path was, why would we think about these things while Macedonia is still below 50% of the average GDP per capita of the European Union, so we better concentrate and focus our financial resources on our own needs rather than thinking about getting a percentage that we're going to share. And probably one motivation that came out first was, okay, EU pattern, we have duties that we need to fulfill, and someone from Brussels has told us that we need to have a legislation that will envisage that, and finally mechanisms that will enable us to implement it. But we had another motivation, which is much more imminent these days, and that made us realize that we definitely have a substantial national interest to be part of this story. Migrant flows. Macedonia, since the beginning of the year, has 90,000 people that have crossed or stayed in the country in roughly 6 months, causing the country to make a huge financial contribution. It would have been 10 times wiser if we would have been using these funds to help the countries from which these people are coming or fleeing and are going to find safe haven. So even if you look at it from a selfish perspective of a country that has interest to be contributor in that, you're going to see that it's pretty straightforward. We should help because unless we help, we're all going to share the consequences, not only the countries that are affected. There is the other risk. Before being a foreign minister, I had a real job, and one of them involved being in the consultancy business. And at that time, in a very nice hotel very close to here, a little bit less than 10 years ago, I was part of the panel that was making an evaluation about the assistance program that EU was financing in then candidate and potential candidate countries. And we came to an observation that regarding free movement of goods, this assistance could have been improved. And then we tried to make a diagnosis of what are the areas and the fields in which the biggest sources of lost efficiency are emerging. One of them is that too often this assistance goes on automatic pilot. So after a certain period of time, you're more focused about keeping the next project running than about the impact that you're making on the ground. The second one is that too often you go for copy-paste solutions. So you say this solution has worked here, so must be the good one from there, which is a pretty risky bet to make because every single country has its own needs and has its own mentality and things on the ground, so you cannot go for copy-paste solutions. And last but not least, the culture. You cannot help by thinking that what is good in your country will be good in the country that is receiving these funds. I will correct my first statement because I have come to a conclusion that the one I consulted and said the money is the most important item was wrong.
Thank you.
And I will tell you very simply why I think so and why we have applied such a model. We said that among the priorities in which we are never cutting expenses in our country, in our own budget, is education. Macedonia is probably one of the few countries in the world that guarantees to every single Macedonian citizen who inscribes himself on one of the top 100 universities in the world that the government is sponsoring full-scale scholarship. So airfare, insurance, food, tuition fees, everything from scratch. And there is a reason for that. We feel that our country is never going to catch up with the average GDP per capita of the European Union unless we have educated people. Nothing less matters. Actually, this is the bottom line. So why we wouldn't apply the same kind of a system to those that we would like to humbly assist? Hence, our methodology in participating in achieving development goals has been the following one. We've replicated our national system to foreign students and targeting countries that are in need by providing full-scale scholarships to Macedonian universities. We have a couple of them that are English taught, where language is not a barrier, because obviously not everybody on this world speaks Macedonian. And my Bulgarian friend tends to disagree with that, but that's another story. And we have done a program for roughly 100 students a year, which are coming from targeted countries and which enjoy full-scale scholarships to Macedonia. One it's a direct assistance to the country. 2, we have a benefit because these guys are becoming our ambassadors in the countries where we don't have a lot of connections at the current stage. I'll stop there, but I will be available for further questions to answer.
Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you.
Thank you for emphasizing this very important point, the education. It has proven to be one of the prerogatives for the development in so many countries. And thank you for finding your own niche here and moving on with it very effectively. Let's move to African continent. Let me introduce His Excellency Mr. Abdoulaye Diop, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mali. As a career diplomat and with professional experience both on transatlantic relations, being a former ambassador to the US and counselor in Brussels, and within the United Nations system as member of Malian delegation to the Security Council, Mr. Diop has an additional perspective as a former head of the African Office of the World Food Programme, as the representative of the African Union. Excellence, je vous souhaite la bienvenue en Croatie. C'est avec grand plaisir que nous vous accueillons. Mali is currently facing one of the greatest security challenges, the rise of ISIL. Your country is hosting United Nations, African Union, and European Union stabilization, peacekeeping, and training missions. Tell us your perspective as a recipient of security. How are you confronting the threat of ISIL? As a member of Organization of Islamic Cooperation and African Union, how would that regional context shape your response?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and before I get into your response, I want to thank Croatia for this important initiative, as well as my friend Vesna for allowing me in this beautiful country. Yes, the terrorist threat today is one of the biggest challenges that countries like Mali is facing. If you remember, in 2012, some rebel groups allied with some of the terrorist network invaded the 2/3 of the country in the north. And if you look at this threat, it's mainly that this is not only about Mali, it's about the whole region, because we have a kind of a deadly triangle in the northern West Africa. In Mali, you have Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb linked with local terrorist networks, and you have Boko Haram in Nigeria, and you have ISIL and other group in the southern part of Libya. Thanks to the French intervention supported by European Union, we have been able to kick out of the country most of these terrorists, and we are now receiving one of the biggest UN mission in the country to tackle this threat. But the danger is we are not only fighting terrorist networks, we are fighting also an organized crime, because the drug threat is as big as terrorist threat. And I'm not talking about even the migration, the human trafficking, the hostage taking. So we are clearly in a criminal economy, which is endangering life and the development in our region. And we are talking about vast territory in the Sahara Desert with porous borders. And now, if you look at, okay, what response can we provide to address the terrorist threat? I think we see few things. Of course, we have gotten support from France and other European countries, but we think on the longer run, we need to help countries in the region, like Mali, Burkina, Niger, and Chad, which have established what they call the G5 organization. The 5 Sahelian countries trying to merge the effort to fight the terrorist threat, but also there is another initiative called the Nouakchott Initiative, which is an African Union initiative covering the 11 Sahelian countries. We are trying to set up a regional mechanism to tackle the insecurity, transnational crime, transborders issues as well. But what we need is really how our partners, the UN, the EU, the US, and the rest can help to support this regional effort. Because I think what we are tackling is the diversion of resources from development to address the security issues. And we think this is a global threat. And Mali is not very far from Europe. So we think we have to be helped to increase our capacity to address this issue. The second link with the terrorism is also about, it's mainly about also the ideology. This we need also to understand. It's not about only marginalization, it's also ideology. How can we work together to de-radicalize, to help our children? Because if you take an example of a country like Mali, which have been a Muslim country from the Middle Ages, we are seeing our young men trained in foreign countries coming to teach us what is even Islam. And the people are killing are not non-Muslim. They are mainly Muslim. So it means that it's really an ideological battle. To counter these people, we need to turn our clerics, our society, our children, so that they are educated and they can understand what is at stake. While we are talking about de-radicalization in our countries, I think European and the rest also, you can help us to address the issue of Islamophobia at the same time. Because, you know, this issue is also being used by the radicals as element of their own ideologies. And for us, what is the alternative against the terrorists? Of course, we need to use the military means, but it will not be enough. We think we need to also give our young people alternatives, because they are the more vulnerable. How can we provide more education, as my friend Nikola touched on that one? Education, job opportunities, and as well as economic development for this, because they are exposed to all sorts of, if you look at the northern part of Mali or in the Sahel, in many areas, the only economic activity is provided by terrorist networks or drug smugglers or hostage takers. So we need to give opportunity to our young men so that they have options in what we do. In May 15, in Mali, we signed a peace agreement with some of the rebel organizations to move into the peace process, which also allow us to have a political offer for Malians who recognize the country. But at the same time, it allows us to isolate terrorist organizations so that we can know who is for peace and who has an agenda which is not a peaceful agenda. Last point, coming to your issue about development, as we are heading to Addis Ababa to talk about the financing for development. Just one thought that I have I would like to share with you. My own understanding is that the MDGs have focused mainly on social issues. We have done a lot, but we realize it's not enough to absorb the lack of development gap. As we are moving forward in Africa, thinking about the post-2015 development agenda and the African Common Position, which have been adopted in Malabo last year, we think that the focus for African countries is now, it should be now how we can focus on transforming economic transformation and how to make this economic transformation as inclusive as possible. Because we realize investing in the social development, you need to create wealth first so you can reinvest in the social sector. We think that is really very important. Why it should be that? I think we need an economic transformation which is based on where we have assets, which is mainly in the natural sector. And also like rural development. If we look at places like Africa, in most of our countries, 70% of the population live from agriculture. So if you want to have an inclusive development, you have to create an agricultural-led economic development. We can give opportunity to the majority and to be based also on the raw material, which is abundant on the continent. So going forward and looking at the post-2015 development agenda, it should not be on welfare, on only social development. We have to go beyond to move in, to look into the economic transformation of the continent. Thank you.
Merci bien.
Merci.
Thank you so much for giving us this wider perspective on this fight against terrorism aspect, which is very real, very pressing, and I think should be definitely considered and intertwined with the development aspect, because security is one of the development goals aspects. And thank you for giving us the African perspective, which is very important, especially because we are here in Europe and we can have view, but from the very distant, but you made it much closer to us, and thank you for that. So moving back to the region, our next panelist is His Excellency First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kosovo, Mr. Hashim Thaҫi. Mire serde.
Thank you.
Mr. First Deputy Prime Minister, you have played a key role in your country's peace process as Kosovo's chief negotiator. You really know how to differentiate a good deal from a bad one. Based on that experience, how would you define a good or a bad donor? How can a donor encourage or discourage the peace process? Please do share with us some examples.
Thank you. I will continue in Albanian language. Okay, few seconds. Faleminderit shumë për ftesën dhe për moshën e kënaqësi e veçantë të jem në forumin Kroacia dhe jam një prej veteranëve të këtij forumi dhe marr pjesë me kënaqësinë më të madhe. Por më lejoni që të hyj në temën në çështjen që ju e shtruat. Vendi im ka specifikat e veta që ka kaluar në procesin e luftës, të paqes, të shtetbërjes, të konsolidimit, të forcimit të subjektivitetit ndërkombëtar, të njohjes ndërkombëtare, të zhvillimit dhe tash në një proces të pajtimit. Ajo që mund të them nga përvoja ime si negociator në gjitha proceset që ka kaluar vendi im që nga viti 98-99 në konferencën në Rambuje, kur kriza Kosovës ishte në kulmin e saj, pra në shkurt vitit 1999, të gjitha akteret, edhe vendor kosovar, por edhe ndërkombëtar, kemi qenë të fokusuar se si të parandalojmë krizën, si të parandalojmë luftën, si të arrijmë paqen. Dhe me një orientim mund të them, apo diskutim minimal, çka një ditë pas përmbylljes së krizës. Dhe gjatë asaj periudhe, rreth 1 milion qytetarë të Kosovës u deportuan nga Kosova, ka ndodhur që rreth 80% të regioneve caktuara të Kosovës të shkatërrohen në tërësi. Gjithashtu ishte me përfundimin e luftës faza më e rëndësishme ishte kthimi i njerëzve, 1 milion njerëzve në shtëpitë e tyre, në pronat e tyre, nevoja për rehabilitimin e shtëpive, ndërtimin e shtëpive, rjetit energjetik dhe nevojat më ekzistenciale për njerëzit. Por ne kemi pasur fat që kemi bashkëpunuar shumë ngushtë me donatorë evropianë, amerikanë, japonezë dhe të vendeve të tjera. Natyrisht se këtë proces mund të themi të fazës së parë të pas luftës apo emergjencës, mund të quajmë e përcjellin edhe shumë suksese, por në të njëjtën kohë edhe dobësi, sepse nuk mund të kesh pajtim pa një proces kuptimin edhe të investimit, të asistencës, por të bërë se një jetë më të mirë për gjithë qytetarët e atij vendi. Kosova ka pasur fatin se ka pasur një vëmendje të shtuar të bashkësisë ndërkombëtare. Por duhet të them se mësimi i parë se pavarësisht se mund të kesh shumë fonde në dispozicion apo donacione të shumta, kjo nuk garanton suksesin e menjëhershëm. Dhe kemi edhe aspekte tjera që kanë përcjellur lëshimet e ndryshme, në veçanti mos koordinimi i donatorëve. Sepse ka pasur lëshimet që kanë ndodhur si në projekte të njëjta, por dhe konkurruese, që nga njerë ka sjellur edhe pështjellime të panevojshme tek ne, por lëshimi mendoj ajo që ka munguar më shumë të këtij procesi që asistenca të përqendroj me mirë në fushat e nevojshme dhe nevojat e qytetarëve ka qenë sepse ka munguar inputi nga komuniteti vendor. Dhe kjo ka qenë jetike. Ma tepër ka pasur një asistencë në kuptimin asaj që ndërkombëtarët e quajnë donor driven. Nuk mund të themi se ka qenë edhe aq organike e konsultuar me nevojat e komunitetit dhe që të destinohet ajo asistencë aty ku është masë e nevojshme, mëse domosdoshme. Në të njëjtën kohë, ky proces ka qenë paksa i gjatë, duke kaluar në fazë të një emergjencë 7-8 vjeçare, sepse më tepër ka qenë në një fazë si të menaxhohet kriza, dhe jo se si të shkohet në një bazament, në një aspekt tjetër zhvillimor. Pra në rastin e Kosovës, në fazën fillestare ka qenë një orientim se si të mos bëhet me keq. Dërsa Kosova ka pasur nevojë që të lëviz drejt asaj se si të bëhet edhe më mirë dhe të kalohet në fazën tjetër zhvillimore. Pra të kalohet nga një crisis management në një proces zhvillimor. Ndërsa sot Kosova nuk është në krizë, edhe në fazën tjetër të negociatave që kemi zhvilluar në Vjenë për statusin politik të Kosovës me Bashkinë Ndërkombëtare dhe me Serbinë, në vitet 2006-2008, u hequr nga presidenti Ahtisaari, ka qenë një proces më mirë i koordinuar, dhe më njerë pas berjes së Kosovës së pavarur dhe sovrane në shkurt vitit 2008, në korrekt vitit 2008 në Bruxelles është mbajtur konferenca e donatorëve, një konferencë që ka dhënë rezultatet konkrete, rezultate këto që kanë reflektu në jetën e njerëzve edhe në funksionimin e shtetit të Kosovës, po ajo që dëshiroj të potencoj se mësimet e mia nga procesi i negociatave në një proces të asistencës ndërkombëtare apo të mbështetjes ndërkombëtare është se duhet patjetër një koordinim më i mirë i gjithë donatorëve, duhet që të jetë i koordinuar edhe me komunitetin, pra që të jenë organike, motivuar dhe ndikuar për njerëzve që jetojnë aty, dhe të kalohet në një mentalitet gradual zhvillimor. Ndërsa, gjithashtu edhe në fazën tjetër të negociatave dëshiroj ta bartni përvojë tash të negociatat për normalizimin e plotë të marrëdhënieve mes shtetit Kosovës dhe Serbisë, është ajo se ne kalum mund të them mund të ceki 5 faza që kemi kaluar si Kosovë deri më tani. E para faza e luftës, paqes, emergjencës. Pastaj tash jemi në një fazë zhvillimore që po ndikon drejt për drejt edhe në pajtimin e popujve. Unë dua të flas vetëm për një rast që jemi dakorduar, mund të them se sa është e rëndësishme për popujt investimi, asistenca, donacioni dhe mbështetja ndërkombëtare edhe për këtë rajonin tonë që folum këtu, është ajo se në takimin e parë që kam zhvilluar si kryeministër i vendit me kryeministrin e Serbisë Dačić, në udhëheqjen e baroneshës Ashton, pa asnjë ndërmjetësim ndërkombëtar ne jemi pajtuar që ndërtojmë autostradën Prishtinë-Nish. Dhe në moment që ne kemi kërkuar mjete për Bashkimit Evropian, kishte heshtje. Kërkoj pajtimi, natyrisht, ishte një proces shumë rëndësishëm dhe ju heqëm një brillante nga baronesha Ashton, por mjetet mungonin që të arrihet paqja, që të arrihet zhvillimi, që të arrihet pajtimi, kërkohet edhe mbështetje, kërkohet edhe zhvillim edhe mirëqenie sociale. Prandaj unë ndërlidhi shumë paqen, zhvillimin edhe pajtimin. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for this great insight into this process, which was certainly a long one, but yielded results, as we can see, thanks to your positive and optimistic approach. And I do agree that the coordination between the donors is one of the key issues that even today needs to be coordinated better, perfected. And this is why we are talking here. This is one of the main points of our panel. And of course, the focus on the real needs of the recipient. That is one of the main issues that we are discussing, and there's certainly room for improvement. Let's hear from our next speaker now. Our next panelist is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, His Excellency Mr. Neris Germanas. Sveiki atvykę. Excellency, having a professional background in scientific education and economic affairs, and as a former ambassador to Finland and permanent representative of the Republic of Lithuania to the Council of Europe, you have been an insider within the EU institutional corridors. Lithuania being a new donor, tell us what would be your country's smart way of combining money, knowledge, and experience. To what extent is the own traditional experience important for effective development? And please do share with us some concrete examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really, first of all, I would like to thank organizers of this Croatian forum, which is really gathering a lot of the prominent politicians. And first of all, I would like to thank Vesna Pejic, because not only because she is the first deputy prime minister of the Croatia and Minister of Foreign Affairs, but because she is a very good friend of Lithuania and had very good ties with us. And labai ačiū ir dėkoju už viską. And when I read the annotation of this panel, I found that really this three most important issue is very important, and the importance in the implementation of the agenda of 2015. But at the same time, I would like to ask myself and maybe you, if at the same time all three pillars is equal, or one of them is more important for us. I think maybe it's not a relevant question, but anyway, in different stages, maybe money or partnership or knowledge is very important. But I think that really at the beginning, maybe money is very needed. Before anything you're doing, money is really needed, and you must start it from money. But at the same time, from Lithuania point of view, official development assistant still has a role to play, but this role is changing because the life is changing, global world is changing. And Lithuania believes that official development assistance used in a smart way could mobilize additional resources, domestic and private, to finance sustainable development. And in our opinion, and maybe I heard this from the other speaker, this assistance must be much more targeted. And more targeted, that means that people must see the result of this assistance, because without that, our assistance maybe is not so efficient as we would like to say. And at the same time, OECD alone does not have the capacity to put end of the extreme poverty. Alongside the financial support, I think that it's very important to more use the knowledges, more use the science, more use any innovation that could help the people of the donors country get this much. And here goes to my point, which is very important for me and very important for me myself. I think that very important thing is the transfer or provide the information about the knowledges, about the experiences, about the used science, used other new technology for the implementation of the goal which is needed to countries. And I think that Lithuania, which has the experiences of more than 20 years, own experiences going from transformation period from one to other situation, have the right to show the experiences and right to show how we can do that, how we can go. And I think that for countries like Lithuania, like other countries, it's very important that our experience could be used for the other countries. And we really are ready to propose our experience, show our experience. As you mentioned, Lithuania is a relatively new donors. But we believe that our experience of transformative processes is a great value added. For example, we Lithuanian experts participated in the more than 50 EU-funded projects and in EU pre-accession and neighboring countries. Lithuanian expertise is provided within sector of agriculture, financial, social protection, customs, and others. As a good example of partnership and the successful implementation of policy coherence for development, let me mention our international mission. First, our international big mission, provincial reconstruction team in Ghor province in Afghanistan, led by Lithuania. During the 7 years, Lithuania completed more than 200 development projects in Afghanistan, founded by Lithuania Development Cooperation and Democracy Promotion Program of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In addition, the significant investment was attracted from the other provincial reconstruction team, partners countries as like USA, Denmark, Japan, Croatia, and Greece, that helped to work together to the common goals. Several Lithuanian institutions, farming and veterinary experts, medics, architects, engineering, civil aviation specialists, geologists, archaeologists, and non-governmental organizations were involved in development cooperation with Afghanistan. By initiating development cooperation project, Lithuania developed close cooperation with Afghanistan government, the administration of Ghor province, and with the local communities. Lithuania-led provincial reconstruction team served as a joint military as a civilian mission. It contributed to the efforts of international community to reconstruct Afghanistan. It has supported stable and consistent development of national economy and infrastructure, improved living conditions of the local population, promoting rule of law, fostering observation of the human rights and freedom. The mission has the first and the most significant engagement by Lithuania as a member of international donors. Within a framework the bilateral project, we are sharing transition experience with some countries which I call the member of the Eastern European Partnership. First of all, that means the Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. Lithuanian experts training more than 400 custom officers in Ukraine, in Moldova. Our experts actively working in Georgia in different areas and assist the Georgian municipalities in strategic planning and on municipality level. And our as expert working in the Ukrainian government as expert and advisors. This is example how the small country like Lithuania, as I said, can use all possibility as in bilateral relation, as in the multilateral organization and others. And finally, I would like to say that one point which is very important for me, and I think never touched this, one aspect is very important for the people in different countries, that is spread information. Information must be spread in this country and show what is the result of this donor, how to use this money, and how to change the life of the people. This is very important. If you don't provide the information about, sometimes our efforts maybe not achieve a final goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you for mentioning Afghanistan here. I see that we have some common points, and you have experienced very much similar issues and processes as Croatia did. Also, thank you for mentioning the Eastern Partnership as an additional important forum for discussion on development issues as well. I think we can all learn from this from Lithuanian perspective. Thank you. And let us follow suit with the Asian perspective. Allow me to introduce Deputy Minister for Climate Change and International Affairs, Ambassador for Climate Change in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, His Excellency Mr. Jae-shu Choi. Kyung Hamnida.
Thank you.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Excellency, you have been a career diplomat specializing in environmental policies and economic affairs. Having in mind your background and looking at Korea today, Tell us, what is the secret of Korea's success? Is it investing in human resources development? Is it investing in institutional capacities, human rights, environment, or is it something else? And another point, having in mind that climate change is nowadays a hot topic ahead of the Paris conference, and clearly a cross-cutting issue and one of your very own personal specialties, give us your perspective on the relation between the climate change and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara, for your kind introduction and quite challenging questions. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to attend this Croatia Forum as the first Korean representative. This is why I am very much honored. Also, I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt thanks to the Madam First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vesna Fusigny, for kind invitation extended to Korea. As many speakers said, today's event is significant in driving the momentum to reach new sustainable development goals. The forum is also very timely, taking place in the run-up to the third Financing for Development Conference next week in Addis Ababa. Against this backdrop, I would like to share how Korea's unique development experience with a special focus on education and governance may add value to the sustainable growth of other developing countries. And then I will go to your second question on the relationship of the climate change and sustainable development. Well, Korea, the recipient turned donor country, is now recognized the global community as a full-fledged donor by having joined in OECD Development Assistance Committee in 2010. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway mentioned, in 1953, the year the Korean War ended, the GDP per capita of Korea was a mere $67 US. But today, the number reached 28,000. So about 400 times increase in just 60 years. Some people call this a miracle, but it is not a miracle. Just a prime example of how Korea's investment on education and good governance led to this growth. Ladies and gentlemen, education played a key critical role in Korea's transformation from one of the poorest countries to an industrializing nation. When Korea regained its independence in 1945, the literacy rate was mere 22%, with less than 20% of children attending the secondary school. However, in just a decade, the attendance rate in primary schools reached 90% by 1957, and the literacy rate stood at 70%. These numbers were more than twice of those other Asian developing countries. Most importantly, investment in education fueled economic growth in Korea. The completion of the primary school education after the Korean War supplied the workers for labor-intensive industries in the 1960s, headed by textile industry. The expansion of the secondary education contributed to the development of capital-intensive industries of the 1970s and 1980s. At that time, Korean government started to develop automobile industry and heavy petrochemical industries. The expansion of the tertiary education in the 1990s laid the foundation by the Korea's success in information technology and the transition to a knowledge-based economy. Now you see the symbol of the smartphone of Samsung and LG Electronics. In addition to such economic growth, the universal access to the schools promoted social mobility, stability, equality, and inclusiveness. The accumulation of the quality human capital is a must, not a choice, for economic development. And therefore, Korea's focus on developing a universal education system proved to be a strong foundation for its growth.
In addition to the education, I also want to highlight the importance of intangible infrastructure such as governance and institutions. They had not received a limelight until the 1980s, when the international community began to realize the importance of good governance and effective institutions for development. Africa is not poor, but just poorly managed. This is not my words. These are the words of President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, Nobel Peace Laureate, and Africa's first female president. These words embody the significance of the governance. Pointedly, thanks to the good governance and institutions, Korea was able to rise above the ruins of the Korean War in the 1950s and escape from the absolute poverty within a generation. All in all, Korea's economic growth and prosperity are the fruit of educated human capital, good governance, and effective institutions. Based on our own development experience, education is the single most sector where Korea's ODA flows through its aid agency, Korea International Cooperation Agency, or KOICA. Korea also offered 334 capacity building training programs for the government officials from abroad in 2014 as a means of transferring knowledge and know-how in all areas, such as the rural development, e-government, customs service, among others. Finally, I would like to briefly touch on the relationship of climate change and development or sustainable development. As UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, our compatriot, said, climate change is one of the most defining issues of the century. You are the last generation to tackle these climate change issues. Indeed, we are living in a paradox where our way of life is undermining our planet. The linear economic structure, such as a pattern of mass production and mass consumption, is not only unsustainable, but it is also aggravating climate change and imperiling our future. This year, we have 3 milestone events in the area of climate change and development. Also, many speakers already mentioned about these 3 events. Just I repeat. Next week's Financing for Development Conference in Addis Ababa, and the September's UN Post-2015 Summit, and the UN Climate Conference in Paris in December. These 3 events should be dovetail each other, and we should collaborate together. This is the way we can reconcile climate change with the Sustainable Development Goals. To this end, we have to achieve robust outcome for each event. In particular, the Paris Climate Agreement should be universal and legally binding, as well as applicable to all countries. As you know, Korea is a host country of Green Climate Fund. We are hoping that GCF, which is the primary financial organization under new climate regime, will promote the transformation of the developing countries into low carbon and climate resilient economy. In conclusion, these 3 events encompass the overall aspect of our lives. I truly hope everyone here will share their experiences, knowledge, and hopeful spirit, such as can-do spirit for inclusive and sustainable growth for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you very much. Thanks for highlighting the much like the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Macedonia, the importance of education for Korea as well as for our region, and for Macedonian niche that you found in education. It's certainly very important, and thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for feeding into the climate change, the development into the climate change discussions. I think you gave us a brief overview of what is expected as an expert in that field, and thank you for that. And now, finally, I have the special honor to present Croatia's very own First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Her Excellency Ms. Vesna Pusic, Madam First Deputy Prime Minister, you have been a fervent advocate of Croatia's development policy and gender equality, and the main proponent of the role of civilian experts in international peace and military missions. As a founder of the initiative in defense of small donors, what do you think is the added value of small donors? What is to you, being both foreign and European affairs and development minister at the same time, a recipe for a lasting development partnership between donor and recipient countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Allow me to just briefly recognize our moderator, Ms. Lara Romano, who has been our sole civilian diplomat and civilian representative in Afghanistan for a year. She was very successful promoting our development cooperation projects there. But the thing that impressed me the most was the way she talked about people that she worked with in Afghanistan when she came back. And she talked about them with sincere respect. And I think this actually is, in my opinion, the key. The other key is, and I will tell you here a joke that we have. There are two young boys helping an old lady across the street. And she's dragging her feet a little, but they finally managed to take her across the street. And a policeman that's watching them sees that something's suspicious there, so he approaches the boys and asks them what are they doing. And they say, well, we are scouts and we have to do a good deed every day. So our good deed for today is helping this old lady across the street. And the policeman says, yes, but why two of you? And they say, well, because she doesn't want to go. So this is sometimes the problem that we have with development cooperation. Sometimes we want to impose something that the other the side doesn't want to do, or push them in a direction where they don't want to go. That doesn't mean that this is always wrong. It only means that it shouldn't be done without partnership. That both sides should really understand what we are doing in development cooperation and where the projects, where the whole effort is leading. And this is why we in this country insist on changing from development aid to development cooperation, because in the trilemma of money, knowledge, and partnership, I would say that the most important are all three. There is certainly no development cooperation without money. But there is also certain that some major disasters were created by using a lot of money. And Iraq is probably one case in point. A lot of money was used there with pretty disastrous effects until Iraqis finally started taking over and imposing some of their own criteria and projects, and slowly took over the running of their country. So you can have a lot of money and create a pretty big disaster. Knowledge, yes, you can buy it, but if you don't know what you're talking about, you usually go for charlatans. And charlatans have created more havoc in development cooperation than probably anybody else. People who talk nicely go there, steal a lot of dough, and come back and leave bigger disaster than they encountered when they came there. And partnership. Partnership is seen as a little soft, woolly, sentimental, what partnership? If I'm providing the money, how can I be partner with these guys that are using my money for their development? However, first of all, the minimum we can call it is partnership. And this is actually the best deal both sides can get out of this, because very often it's not really partnership. If it's one-sided, it's really exploitation. So partnership is a guarantee for at least both sides understanding what they're doing, and a prerequisite, I think, for effective development cooperation. Because it is true that one side comes in with a certain amount of money for a project. But it is also true that after that, there are companies from that country coming to work in this country. If it's successful, it's going to become a new market. So it's definitely a give and take, especially if you look at more than just half a year or 1 year. If you're successful in development cooperation, it's definitely going to be useful for your own companies, for entrepreneurs, for all kinds of the goods that are going to be sold there. So any successful development cooperation, in other words, development cooperation that actually manages to deliver some development, it's going to also be good for whoever initially started with this partnership. So if it's not partnership, it's nothing. It's unsuccessful development aid, because it doesn't create the feedback, which means your development aid hasn't really helped anybody to develop. So I think all these three aspects that we have mentioned in the title of this panel have to be present, have to be questioned continuously, and have to be sort of reasserted. Lara asked me at the beginning why this small donors initiative. There is, of course, no development cooperation without big donors. That's clear. But there is probably not more than 10 countries that are big donors around the world. That leaves practically everybody else outside of these relationships. And development cooperation is something that actually can be done and should be done with also small sums of money. Sums such as $500,000 or $1 million can do a lot. Can build a nursery school, can build a training hospital for midwives, can, minuscule amounts of money, can publish a book of poems from different ethnic groups in Afghanistan as the first thing that they all do together, and where you discover in translations that they have almost identical love songs, that they have almost identical feelings toward their country. Although some are, Pashtuns and other Tajiks and thirds or something else. But it makes you understand that beyond and behind all the fighting and brutality and everything that we associate with that country, there are people who write about that country, who sing about that country, in almost identical ways. This is, I think, a valuable starting point or a valuable realization that you can do some things in all different parts of the country, maybe in the same way, although on the first impression is that it's impossible to somehow bring them together. Very small amounts of money can do that. Very small amounts of money also enable you, especially if you have little money for this, you're going to be very careful. Croatia cannot afford to lose even $100,000 in development aid, throw it out the window and say, it didn't work, sorry. We cannot afford to do that. So we're very careful in choosing the projects that we support and in following how they're actually taking place and how they're actually being implemented in Afghanistan and in Burma and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, wherever we go, how they're actually being carried out. Sometimes it's easier to get feedback and to get communication with the end users, so to speak, with small amounts of money. And finally, in order to further the cause of development cooperation, and we strongly believe that there are two instruments of international relations and world relations and world politics today. One is energy, the other is development cooperation. And in order to create consensus around that, you need more countries rather than fewer countries. And you need to convince and to help realize countries that are relatively poor, like us, that used to receive development aid only a few years ago, like us, that they can also be the providers, the initial providers, let's say, in this development cooperation. This helps create a global consensus on promoting development cooperation, on using everybody's experience here, I want to say around the table, but along the panel, on education, on science, on different things, on the wrong ways to approach development cooperation in order to avoid it in the future. It helps create a consensus that this is something that should be universal, that any country can be part and can be on both sides of this relationship, and that as soon as you're not on the initial receiving end, you should be on the initial providing end. I'm emphasizing the initial because eventually you're going to profit from it any which way you look at it if it's efficient and focused development cooperation and development projects. So by bringing in small donors, we help create a global consensus around this need to promote development cooperation as a means of international relations. And this is why we also insisted on having foreign ministers, because a lot of countries have development ministers, but we insisted on having foreign ministers address this topic, because we believe that this actually is foreign policy and that this actually is international relations. So thank you very much. We have a lot to sort of do on this topic, but if I may end with 3 things that I think have been the key obstacles in successful development cooperation, and which I think we have to address fair and square and deal with in the future. The 3 things are arrogance, misappropriation of funds, that translates as stealing and corruption. And these are the obstacles that have given a great concept, which is development cooperation, very often a bad name. This doesn't mean that development cooperation should be abandoned or somehow stigmatized. On the contrary, it means that we should focus on eradicating these things, minimizing their influence, and promoting development cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam First Deputy Prime Minister, for this very personal insight into the initiative that is so close to your heart. I think it's very important to include the small donors into the circle of the rest of the traditional, new, emerging countries that want to contribute. And I think that small donors can make a big difference. And I would like to just sum up our panel with a few highlights, just brief messages that I gathered from the discussion. And I can say that we can all agree that balance does matter and the balanced approach does matter. We should address the root causes in order to find out the right solution. It's not about the donor's selfishness. It is about the real needs of the partner or recipient. And links and synergies and interconnections are important. Energy and development, security and development, economic growth and development, climate change and development, interconnections, work interconnections are important. Dare to step out of your comfort zone and try to intertwine and combine different policies, modalities, and approaches for a more effective result. And as our First Deputy Prime Minister said, taking responsibility for yourself is important in order to help others. Find your own specific niche that works well with the partner country and make it your staple. And I would like to conclude by an old Afghan proverb that says, "Don't show me the palm tree, show me the dates," to give us all some food for thought. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists, Madam First Deputy Prime Minister, our host of the conference, all the panelists present here, the audience, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And I certainly would like to introduce our special address speaker, the Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland. Madam.
Do you want to release the panel so that they can?
Sure. Okay. Yes. Why not?
Dobar dan, Dubrovnik. Thanks to Minister Pusic, thanks to Lara. It is great to be back. And thanks to all our Croatian hosts for gathering us once again in this beautiful and historic place. Croatia has come so far since this forum began 10 years ago. Now a member of both NATO and the European Union, today Croatia is not a net importer, but a net exporter of regional and global security and development from Afghanistan to Kosovo to West Africa. And the United States is grateful for the strong alliance between our two countries. As we sit here in this beautiful Dalmatian paradise, it's hard to believe how far the entire region has come. Just 20 years ago, a little over 300 kilometers from here, the tragedy of Srebrenica was unfolding, while the world stood by and watched. Tomorrow, many of us will honor the victims and remember the horrific cost of a Europe divided. But we have to do more than that. Memory alone is not enough. We owe it to those who lost their lives in the Balkan Wars to ensure that history never repeats itself and that we bury once and for all the hatred, the criminality, the greed, and the despotism that flourished here, and build in its place a Balkans whole, free, prosperous, and at peace. So while this conference has been about global development, I want to talk today about energizing development and integration here in the Balkans. Today, I want to appeal to leaders and citizens alike across this region on behalf of the United States to finish the job and to resist the forces seeking to unwind the progress that you have already made. That will require Balkan leaders and citizens to do three things. First, to complete the democratic map of this region by finally turning the page on old hatreds and new rivalries. Second, to kickstart prosperity and growth by connecting the countries of this region with new roads, new railroads, ports, and energy infrastructure. And third, to join forces in making the Balkans a no-go zone for today's most pernicious threats to strong statehood and individual liberty: violent extremism, corruption and criminality, and the sleazy autocrats and oligarchs who come to you bearing gifts that promote their own interests, not yours. And as you tackle these issues and do so together as a unit in the Western Balkans, the United States and the rest of us in the transatlantic community will stand with you. Let's start with the democratic map. The countries of this region have done so much. Today, 3 Western Balkan countries are NATO members, 2 are EU members, 4 have EU stabilization agreements in effect, 1 more is on the path to one, and 3 more aspire to join NATO. And yet, despite all this progress, too much time is still wasted here feuding instead of building. Take Bosnia-Herzegovina. 20 years after Dayton, it's unconscionable that the unity of that state is still publicly questioned by those seeking to block reform and putting the IMF program at risk. The EU has offered Bosnia-Herzegovina a membership perspective, and last month it activated its SAA. But politicians there continue to put ethnic and party interests ahead of the basic social, economic, and political reforms that the country needs to advance. The United States joins the EU, the IMF, and the World Bank in urging Bosnia-Herzegovina's leaders to make crucial reform decisions now, or risk being left behind for another 20 years. Our message to Macedonia is equally tough. Every opportunity for unity and prosperity awaits you. NATO and EU membership await you. But the major political forces have got to stop squabbling and get on the path to democratic reform sketched out by Commissioner Hahn with United States support, and then move on to settle the name issue with Greece. Again, to the people of Macedonia and its leaders, we say, don't squander this moment. Meanwhile, the EU High Representative Mogherini's, with EU High Representative Mogherini's strong and patient guidance, Kosovo and Serbia are making progress in healing their past wounds and creating the arrangements to live together as good neighbors. But that job is not finished either. We want 2015 to be the year that advances the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue so that the EU can open chapters for Serbia and sign the SAA with Kosovo. But that's going to take courageous decisions in both Pristina and Belgrade. Again, together with the EU, America says, seize this moment and we will help. And it's not just governments that need to act. Civil society, independent media, and private citizens all need to make their voices heard and shape the necessary reforms. They need to keep asserting their right to freedom of expression, representation, and peaceful assembly. This brings me to the second set of challenges: regional development, integration, and energy security to promote prosperity and growth. The countries of this region will only reach their full potential when they replace old rivalries with cooperation and embrace regional projects that bring jobs, investment, and clean business practices to the entire region. The United States strongly supports Chancellor Merkel's Berlin process, and we've reached out to the EU to see how we can bring the international financial institutions, US development assistance, our own private investment and risk insurance to key road, rail, port, and energy projects that you are working on together. We're also working closely with EU VP Šefčovič and Energy and Climate Commissioner Cañete to advance crucial energy projects that have the potential to turn this region into the energy powerhouse that it should be for all of Central Europe. I spoke about this quite a bit last year. These include investments in Kirk Island LNG, key interconnectors to Hungary, to Bulgaria, to Serbia, and new offshore exploration all along the Adriatic. As we redouble our efforts to bring growth to the entire region, we must also be vigilant defenders of our democratic values. Together, we stand for free trade, free markets, and free people. We gain strength when our governments are clean and when they serve their people. We aspire together to set the global gold standard for religious and ethnic tolerance and pluralism. In everything we do, we must support the sovereign right of nations to chart their own democratic futures. And we have to root out the cancer of corruption that eats away at livelihoods, at democracy, and at security. And we have to work together to halt the spread of violent extremism and foreign fighters. Corruption, I don't have to tell you, remains a major impediment to progress in this part of the world. It's that cancer that saps our strength and drives up unemployment and civil unrest. More than that, it opens up vulnerabilities that autocrats and petrostates and violent extremists can exploit. All those who seek to stir up trouble here can find an easy gateway when dirty money can buy corrupt politicians and undercut democratic governance and rule of law. To improve rule of law and close space for anti-democratic forces, we're partnering with Central and Eastern Europe as part of the Emerging Donors Challenge Fund. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we're supporting a network of civil society organizations in their push to implement a new whistleblower protection law. And we're partnering with Romania to train prosecutors in identifying, investigating, and trying corruption cases. In Macedonia, we're partnering with Slovenia to train civil servants in internal auditing and financial management to increase accountability and efficiency in the public sector. In Serbia, we're helping the government to explore energy supply options to diversify the sources and strengthen Serbia's economy and prevent energy from becoming a weapon of outside political influence and corruption. In Albania, we're partnering in a regional network to counter violent extremism, and we particularly commend the recent regional conference in Tirana on this subject. The issues before us, democracy, prosperity, and values-based clean, good governance are not new. We've been working on them here and throughout the Balkans and Central and Eastern Europe for more than 2 decades. But today, as we look across the world and we see severe security challenges both to Europe's south and to its east, this region, the Western Balkans, also sits in the balance. Either the work of the last 20 years can be completed with wise decisions by courageous leaders and citizens pushing for a better life, or this region can once again fall prey to the risks, the hatred, and the outside interference that has brought it grief so many times before in history. And as you make that choice, other nations with similar struggles, from Tunisia to Ukraine, will be watching to see not only if you succeed, but if you can also help show them the way. The United States stands with its partners in the transatlantic community in support of a Balkans that is finally whole, finally free, finally at peace, and has the prosperity that it deserves. But that choice is yours. Thank you very much.